welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: March 18, 25. Entry number 32. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. The snow hasn't stopped for 3 days now. From my window, I can barely make out the security fence marking the perimeter of Coldridge Research Station. The mountains surrounding us have disappeared completely behind the white veil, and with our satellite uplink compromised by the storm, we're essentially cut off from headquarters. Not that it matters much to me. Isolation comes with the territory when you accept a position at a government cartography research facility nestled in the middle of nowhere. This is my 4th month at Coldridge. I was recruited for my expertise in geographical information systems and advanced topographical analysis. The facility houses 12 researchers total, though I only regularly interact with 4 others. Director Cho runs everything with quiet efficiency. Major Reeves ensures military protocols are followed, and Drew has become something of a friend. If you can forge real friendships in a place like this, where everyone's work is compartmentalized. Today started like any other. I woke before dawn, made coffee in the small kitchenette attached to my quarters, and sat down at my workstation by 0600 hours to analyze satellite imagery from yesterday's partial clearing. Standard procedure: compare the new data with our baseline maps, note any discrepancies in the snowpack levels, watch for any signs of avalanche risk or structural changes to the landscape. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a processing error, a simple glitch in how the system was rendering the overlays. Ridge FR17, a distinct geographical feature approximately 2.8 miles northwest of the facility, appeared to be offset by nearly 200 meters from its position on our baseline maps. I ran the calibration subroutines twice. Equipment error seemed the most logical explanation. Perhaps the storm had damaged one of our external sensors, or maybe the satellite feed itself was compromised. But all diagnostics came back green. According to every verification protocol in our system, both the baseline map and the new imagery were correctly calibrated. I spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing with older maps. The ridge has been a fixed landmark for decades, its position verified through multiple geological surveys. Yet somehow, in our most recent scan, it had moved. Not physically, that would be impossible, but its coordinates had changed, as if someone had edited reality itself. At 0930, I decided to bring my findings to Drew. As our field survey specialist, he might have some insight into potential equipment malfunctions that wouldn't show up in standard diagnostics. Electronic drift happens, Drew said, examining my monitors with a frown. But not like this. This isn't signal degradation or atmospheric interference. This is as if the ridge actually moved. I finished. Drew gave me a look, the kind that tells you someone is considering whether you're joking or losing your mind. Let's check the physical archives, he suggested. Compare with the original survey maps. The archive room is kept at a carefully regulated temperature, housing decades of paper maps and survey documents. Some date back to the 1940s when this region was first thoroughly mapped for military purposes. The scent of old paper and the soft glow of preservation lighting greeted us as we pulled the relevant documents. Here, Drew said, pointing to a topographical map dated 1997. Ridge FR17 is exactly where we've always known it to be. I nodded, pulling up more recent surveys on my tablet. It appears in the correct position in every map and survey until our scan from yesterday. Could be an isolated anomaly, Drew suggested. Let's check some of the other landmarks. We spent the next 2 hours comparing coordinates of various geographical features. Most matched perfectly across old and new data, but 3 others, A distinctive rock formation, a natural basin, and a small frozen lake all showed similar discrepancies. Subtle shifts between 90 and 210 meters from their documented positions. "This doesn't make sense," Drew muttered, pulling off his glasses to rub his eyes. "Landmarks don't just change coordinates. Maybe there's a systemic calibration error affecting only certain elevation readings?" I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "We need to report this," Drew said finally. "Protocol dictates any mapping inconsistencies must be documented and reported to Director Cho." I nodded, though something made me hesitate. "Let's gather more data first. If we're going to report something this unusual, we should have comprehensive evidence." Back at my workstation, I ran deeper analyses on the affected areas. Nothing in the data suggested equipment malfunction or operator error. According to our instruments, these landmarks had genuinely shifted position. I began drafting a formal report when my terminal suddenly chimed. An internal message from Major Reeves to all research staff. "Attention all personnel. Due to current weather conditions and potential security concerns, all external communications are temporarily restricted. Field reconnaissance teams are recalled to base immediately. Report any unusual observations through proper channels only. Major C. Reeves, Security Division." I stared at the message longer than necessary. Security concerns was vague even by military standards. Had someone else noticed the mapping anomalies? Or was this about something else entirely? I was still pondering this when Director Cho appeared in my doorway, his thin frame casting a long shadow across my workstation. "Dr. Warner," he said, voice carefully neutral. "I understand you've been accessing historical survey data from the archives today." Not a question. "Nothing happens in this facility without Cho knowing about it." "Yes, sir. I was cross-referencing some anomalous readings in our latest satellite imagery." Cho's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "What kind of anomalies?" I hesitated. "Coordinate discrepancies. Several landmarks appear offset from their documented positions." "By how much?" "Between 90 and 210 meters, sir." Cho was silent for a moment, then stepped fully into my office and closed the door behind him, something he'd never done before. "Have you discussed this with anyone besides Drew Mercer?" "No, sir." "Good." Cho moved closer, examining my screens. "This information is now classified. You will continue your analysis but report findings directly to me. No one else. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir, but may I ask why?" "These discrepancies could affect navigation systems, emergency services." "That's precisely why this information is sensitive," Cho interrupted. "We can't risk causing panic over what might be a technical glitch. My team will handle notifications to necessary parties if these findings are verified." After Cho left, I sat motionless, staring at my screens. His reaction seemed disproportionate. A technical glitch wouldn't warrant immediate classification, unless this wasn't the first time such anomalies had been detected. I pulled up the facility's alert system on my terminal and noticed something strange. The emergency protocols had been updated yesterday, specifically the section dealing with geographical navigation and rescue operations. New language had been added. "In case of coordinate discrepancy, rely on physical landmarks rather than digital mapping systems." Someone had anticipated this. As I stared at my screen, a new thought formed, unsettling and impossible to ignore. What if the maps weren't wrong? What if the physical world itself was changing? I looked out my window at the swirling snowstorm, obscuring everything beyond the immediate perimeter. Somewhere out there, mountains and ridges and lakes were either exactly where they'd always been, or not, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: March 21st, 25. Entry number 37. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. 3 days since I discovered the initial mapping discrepancies, and the situation has escalated beyond my worst expectations. The snowstorm finally cleared yesterday morning, revealing a landscape bathed in blinding white sunlight. With improved conditions, Director Cho authorized a limited field excursion to manually verify our findings. I wasn't part of the team. My expertise is in data analysis, not field operations, but Drew was selected to lead the three-person survey group. They departed at 0800 yesterday with simple objectives: reach Ridge FR17, verify its physical coordinates using redundant GPS systems, and collect photographic evidence to compare against our baseline data. A routine operation expected to take no more than 6 hours. 8 hours passed, then 10. By nightfall, with temperatures plummeting to dangerous levels, Major Reeves initiated emergency protocols. The survey team had missed 3 scheduled check-ins. I spent the night analyzing and reanalyzing our satellite imagery, searching for any clue about where they might have gone. The ridge should have been an easy target, visible from almost any approach vector, with a well-established path even in heavy snow conditions. Yet somehow a team of experienced field researchers equipped with state-of-the-art navigation tools had failed to reach it. At 0437 this morning, the facility's emergency communication system activated. Drew's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. Base, position unknown, equipment failure, landmarks don't match. Major Reeves immediately dispatched a search and rescue team. Unlike the survey group, this team included 2 military personnel with advanced navigation training. They carried emergency medical supplies and cold weather survival gear. By mid-morning, they'd located Drew and 1 other researcher sheltering in a small cave approximately 4.2 miles northeast of the facility. The 3rd team member, Dr. Caitlin Morris, was missing. When they brought Drew back, hypothermia had set in. His lips were blue, his movements sluggish. The medical staff rushed him to our infirmary, but not before he gripped my arm with surprising strength and whispered, "The maps are wrong, Elias. It's not just coordinates. The landmarks themselves, they're in the wrong places." I wanted to question him further, but the medical team pushed me away. Major Reeves established a quarantine perimeter around the infirmary, unusual protocol for hypothermia cases. The 2nd researcher, Dr. Paul Tavish, was in better physical condition. While receiving treatment, he provided an initial report that Major Reeves classified immediately. However, I outranked Tavish in clearance level, which allowed me limited access to his debriefing. According to the report, the survey team had reached what should have been Ridge FR17 after 3 hours of hiking. But instead of the distinctive formation marked on all our maps, they found only a gentle slope. Thinking they'd somehow veered off course, they recalibrated their navigation systems and tried again. The equipment insisted they were exactly where Ridge FR17 should be, yet their physical surroundings disagreed completely with documented terrain features. They tried approaching from a different vector, using a secondary landmark, a distinctive cluster of pine trees that had survived decades of harsh winters. The trees appeared on every map dating back to 1972. But when the team reached the coordinates, they found no trees. Not cut down, not buried under snow. Simply not there, as if they'd never existed. By then, disoriented and with daylight fading, the team decided to return to base. That's when they realized they could no longer agree on which direction the facility lay. Their compasses showed contradictory readings. The GPS coordinates for Coldridge Research Station remained consistent, but following them led the team in circles through unfamiliar terrain. As night fell and temperatures dropped, the team separated. Dr. Morris insisted she recognized a path back to base and struck out alone despite Drew's objections. Drew and Tavish sought emergency shelter instead, which likely saved their lives. The search for Dr. Morris continues, but I've overheard the rescue team's private communications. They're experiencing the same navigation issues that trapped the original survey team. Landmarks documented for decades are missing or appearing in unexpected locations. Compass readings fluctuate wildly in certain areas. The only reliable navigation comes from line-of-sight observations of the facility itself, visible on clear days from higher elevations due to its size. At 1,300 hours today, I was summoned to Director Cho's office. Major Reeves was already there, her military posture somehow more rigid than usual, tension evident in the tight line of her jaw. "Dr. Warner," Cho began without preamble, "what you discovered was merely the beginning. The geographical shifts are accelerating." Major Reeves placed a tablet on the desk between us. "This is classified at the highest level. You are not to discuss this with anyone outside this room." The tablet displayed a topographical comparison, satellite imagery from 1 month ago versus yesterday. The differences were no longer subtle. Entire formations had shifted position. A small lake had changed shape dramatically, and the national forest boundary that should have been 11 miles south of our position now appeared to be less than 7 miles away. "How is this possible?" I asked, my academic mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. "That's what you're going to help us determine," Cho replied. "Your security clearance has been temporarily elevated to allow access to certain historical data." Major Reeves handed me a keycard with my photo but a different security code. "Project Cartographer files are now available to you. Section Delta 7. "What's Project Cartographer?" I asked. Cho and Reeves exchanged glances. "The reason this facility exists," Cho said finally. "We've been monitoring these anomalies for longer than you realize, but never at this scale or acceleration." As I left the meeting, an automated message appeared on every screen and digital display throughout the facility. "Emergency alert. Effective immediately. Do not trust any maps from before the incident. All navigation must be verified through Central Command. Unauthorized excursions beyond facility perimeter are strictly prohibited. Facility Command." The alert didn't specify what the incident was. No one I've cautiously questioned seems to know either. Or if they do, they won't say. I've spent the past 4 hours in a restricted archive room, accessing Project Cartographer files. Most are heavily redacted, but I've pieced together enough to understand that spatial anomalies have been documented in this region for decades. Minor discrepancies, easily attributed to measurement error or natural geological processes. Until 3 months ago when something changed. The files reference an incident that occurred on December 12th. Details are classified beyond even my new access level, but the consequences are clear. Reality itself is becoming unstable, starting with geographical coordinates and progressing to physical landmarks. The implications are staggering. If space itself is becoming unreliable, what else might follow? Time? Causality? I've just received word that Drew has regained consciousness. Major Reeves has denied my request to speak with him, citing quarantine protocols. I find myself wondering if his condition has less to do with hypothermia and more to do with what he witnessed out there. The search for Dr. Morris has been officially suspended. The explanation given was adverse weather conditions. Despite the clear skies visible from my window, tomorrow I'll begin analyzing the Project Cartographer historical data. Perhaps there's a pattern that can explain what's happening, and more importantly, how to stop it before the distortions spread beyond our isolated mountain region. But tonight, I've noticed something that fills me with dread. The mountain peak visible from my window, the one I've looked at every morning for 4 months, appears subtly different in profile. A small change, almost imperceptible. Almost. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: March 24th, 25. Entry number 41. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. I've barely slept in 3 days. The Project Cartographer files have consumed my every waking moment. What I've discovered defies scientific explanation, not just the geographical anomalies themselves, but the government's awareness of them dating back decades. The earliest documentation is from 1967, when a military surveying team reported compass malfunctions and perceptual discrepancies while mapping this region. Their findings were dismissed as equipment failure, possibly exacerbated by altitude sickness. But someone took those reports seriously enough to establish a permanent research outpost, the precursor to our current facility. By the 1980s, the anomalies had developed a pattern: periodic fluctuations in spatial coordinates, typically within a 50-meter variance, occurring in roughly 7-year cycles. The government quietly adjusted official maps after each cycle, attributing the changes to improved surveying techniques. The public never knew. Then came December 12th. The redactions in the files make it impossible to determine exactly what happened, but the consequences are clear. The steady, predictable cycle shattered. What was once a controlled phenomenon became chaotic and accelerating. And we're at the epicenter. This morning, I finally gained access to our mapping software's back-end systems. What I found confirms my worst fears. The program itself is showing signs of instability. Not bugs or glitches in the code. The actual digital representation of our geographical data is changing in real time. I documented one such change over a 40-minute period. A small ravine approximately 1.5 miles southeast of the facility gradually shifted position on the digital map, moving northwest by nearly 300 meters. The satellite imagery showed no movement. The terrain remained physically stable, but the coordinate system itself appeared to be warping. At 1,100 hours, I requested a meeting with Director Cho to share my findings. His secretary informed me he was unavailable until further notice, which is unprecedented. I've never known Cho to be unreachable, especially during an ongoing crisis. With no other options, I approached Major Reeves directly. I found her in the communications center, monitoring the ongoing search efforts for Dr. Morris. "Dr. Warner," she acknowledged without looking up from her screens. "Unless you have information on Morris's whereabouts, this isn't a good time. Major, our mapping software is actively distorting. Not just displaying incorrect data, the digital representation itself is morphing in real time." That got her attention. She dismissed the junior officers with a gesture and led me to a small conference room adjacent to the communications center. "Show me," she demanded. I pulled up the time-lapse recording I'd created, demonstrating how the digital terrain had shifted over 40 minutes despite no physical changes in the satellite imagery. "This shouldn't be possible," I explained. "The software is designed to display data, not alter it. Something external is affecting the entire system." Major Reeves watched the demonstration 3 times, her expression hardening with each viewing. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" she asked. "No. I wanted to inform Director Cho first, but he's unavailable. He's been called to a secure briefing with our oversight committee," she said after a moment's hesitation. "This situation has been escalated." "What exactly is this situation, Major?" "The files reference an incident, but provide no details." "What happened on December 12th? Major Reeves studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing operational security against my need to know. "I wasn't personally present," she finally said, "but I can tell you that a research team attempted to stabilize the anomalies. They developed a theoretical model suggesting the spatial fluctuations could be neutralized through a precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulse. The attempt failed catastrophically." "Failed how?" "Instead of stabilizing the anomalies, they accelerated them. What was once a localized, cyclical phenomenon became active and expanding. The incident wasn't just a failed experiment. It was the trigger point for what we're experiencing now. I processed this information, connecting it to the patterns I'd observed in the historical data. So all these distortions, they're not just happening naturally. We caused them." "That's classified, Dr. Warner," she replied, but her tone confirmed my suspicion. I was about to press further when the facility's alert system activated. The smooth automated voice announced, "Attention all personnel. Temporary communications blackout in effect. All digital systems will undergo security verification. Stand by for further instructions." Every screen in the room went dark simultaneously. "Standard protocol," Major Reeves explained, though she looked concerned. "When digital systems show anomalous behavior, we isolate and verify. But if the mapping distortions are affecting our entire digital infrastructure, then we fall back to analog systems," she interrupted, moving toward a locked cabinet on the wall. She entered a code, revealing a collection of paper maps and traditional compasses. This is why we maintain physical backups of all critical data. The maps were clearly recent, printed within the last week based on their timestamps, but I noticed something unsettling. The terrain features didn't match what I'd been seeing in our digital systems. Either these paper maps were incorrect, or our digital systems had already distorted far beyond what I'd documented. These don't match our current digital data, I pointed out. No, Major Reeves agreed. These were created using pre-incident baseline surveys. They represent the geographical reality as it existed before December 12th. But the emergency alert specifically warned not to trust maps from before the incident. Major Reeves frowned. What emergency alert? I described the message that had appeared on all screens throughout the facility 2 days ago. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. I never authorized that alert. Neither did Director Cho. A chill ran through me. Then who did? Before she could answer, the door opened. Drew stood there, looking pale but determined. He should have been in the infirmary under observation. Elias, he said, ignoring Major Reeves entirely. I need to show you something. Major Reeves stepped forward. Dr. Mercer, you're violating quarantine protocols. With respect, Major, Drew interrupted. What I've discovered takes precedence over protocols. He held up his personal tablet. Restricted devices that shouldn't function during a communications blackout. Somehow, his was still operational. The screen displayed what appeared to be a normal topographical map of our region. But as I watched, the terrain features began to shift. Subtly at first, then with increasing speed and magnitude. Mountains elongated. Valleys deepened. Rivers changed course. It's not just displaying changes, Drew explained, voice tight with controlled panic. It's predicting them. This is a simulation model I developed based on the anomalies we've documented. According to this projection, the distortions will reach critical threshold in less than a week. Critical threshold? I asked. The point at which physical navigation becomes impossible because spatial coordinates no longer maintain consistent relationships. The point at which reality itself, at least as we perceive it geographically, breaks down completely. Major Reeves seized the tablet, studying the simulation with military precision. How did you develop this model? You don't have access to the historical data. I've been documenting the anomalies independently for months, Drew admitted, long before the official acknowledgement. I thought I was losing my mind at first. Landmarks slightly out of place, paths that seemed longer or shorter than they should be. I started keeping detailed records, building a predictive model. And you didn't report this? Major Reeves demanded. I did, to Director Cho. In November, Drew's expression darkened. 1 month before the incident, the implications hit me like a physical blow. If Drew had reported these findings before December 12th, and the research team had attempted their failed stabilization shortly after, they used your data, I realized aloud. Your model informed their attempt to fix the anomalies. Drew nodded grimly, and instead, they shattered reality. That's why I've been kept isolated since returning. Not because of hypothermia, because I know too much. Major Reeves didn't deny it. Instead, she tapped her security badge, attempting to call for backup. Nothing happened. Communications are down, Drew reminded her. And we have maybe 5 days before the distortions reach populated areas. We need to act now. What are you suggesting? I asked. The experiment failed because they tried to stabilize everything at once. But my latest model suggests a different approach. A targeted pulse at the epicenter of the distortions. Which is where? Major Reeves asked, professional despite the breach in protocol. Drew gave a humorless smile. That's the problem. The epicenter keeps moving. But I think I've identified a pattern. And if I'm right, it will pass directly beneath this facility tomorrow at exactly 3:17 p.m. As if in response to his words, the lights flickered. The emergency systems kicked in, bathing the room in red emergency lighting. We need to get to the Geomagnetic research lab, Drew continued urgently. It has the equipment we need to generate the pulse. That area is restricted even to me, I pointed out. Major Reeves stood silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she reached a decision. I can get you access, she said. But first, I need to know one thing. What happened to Dr. Morris out there? Drew's expression crumpled. She didn't just get lost, Major. She walked into a space that doesn't exist on any map. A place where the fabric of reality has already torn. And she didn't come back. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: March 25, 25. Entry number 46. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. I'm writing this by hand in my personal journal. The facility's digital systems have become too unreliable for secure documentation. Paper feels strangely reassuring now, a physical constant in a world where nothing else seems fixed anymore. Last night, after Drew's revelation about the moving epicenter of the distortions, Major Reeves made a decision that likely violated numerous protocols. She granted us access to the Geomagnetic research lab. What we found there confirmed our worst fears while offering a glimmer of hope. The lab contains equipment I've never seen before, technology that appears decades beyond what should be available to a remote government mapping facility. Drew seemed unsurprised, which raised questions about exactly what he knew before joining Coldridge. This is a monitoring station, he explained, gesturing to banks of specialized equipment. They've been tracking the spatial anomalies since the 1980s, recording their frequency and intensity. According to the data archives, the anomalies had maintained a predictable pattern for decades, until December 12th. The instrument readings from that day showed an exponential spike in what the system labeled spatial distortion energy, followed by cascading failures across multiple monitoring stations. Whatever they did, it didn't just fail, Drew said as we examined the readings. It fractured the underlying stability of space itself in this region. Major Reeves accessed classified files that outlined the attempted stabilization procedure. The technical details were beyond my comprehension, but the basic principle was clear. They had tried to cancel out the natural distortion waves with artificially generated counterwaves. Instead, they created a resonance effect that amplified the anomalies and destroyed their predictable cycle. Can we reverse it? I asked. Drew spent hours analyzing the data, finally looking up with bloodshot eyes. Not completely, but we might be able to reestablish a stable pattern, return the anomalies to their previous cyclical nature instead of this exponential growth. Major Reeves received an encrypted communication near dawn. She wouldn't reveal the specifics but informed us that Director Cho had been ordered to remain at headquarters indefinitely. Leadership of the facility now fell to her. You have 12 hours, she told us. After that, evacuation protocols will be initiated. The implications were clear. If we couldn't stabilize the anomalies, the government was prepared to abandon the facility entirely. With time running short, I volunteered to physically verify some of Drew's calculations. We needed precise measurements of how the distortions were manifesting in the immediate vicinity of the facility, data that couldn't be trusted from our compromised digital systems. Major Reeves initially objected, citing the risks of sending anyone outside after what happened to the previous team. Eventually, she relented but insisted I stay within visual range of the facility and maintain constant radio contact. I left at 0900 hours, equipped with analog surveying tools and a traditional compass. My mission was simple: take manual readings at predetermined points around the facility perimeter and report back. The old-fashioned equipment felt awkward after years of relying on digital precision, but given the circumstances, primitive reliability trumped compromised sophistication. The morning air bit at my face as I stepped outside. The snow-covered landscape stretched out before me, pristine and seemingly normal. Only when I began taking measurements did the subtle wrongness become apparent. My first position was supposed to be exactly 100 meters north of the facility's main entrance. I measured the distance carefully, marking it with surveying flags. But when I checked the angle back to the building, it was off by nearly 15 degrees. According to my instruments, I was standing northeast of the facility, not directly north, despite having walked in a straight line. I radioed this discrepancy to Drew, who instructed me to continue with the predetermined pattern. At each point, I documented similar inconsistencies. Distances remained relatively accurate, but directions had become unreliable. A straight path southwest led me southeast. A return journey along the same path didn't bring me back to my starting point. The distortions were subtle enough that I could still navigate by keeping the facility in sight. But without that visual anchor, I understood how easily the survey team had become disoriented. At the 6th measurement point, approximately 500 meters from the facility, I encountered something that made my blood run cold. A perfect circle of bare ground amid the snow, approximately 3 meters in diameter. Within this circle, my compass spun wildly, and my other instruments produced nonsensical readings. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, with a faint scent I couldn't identify. I reported this anomaly to Drew, who ordered me to return immediately. As I turned back toward the facility, I noticed something impossible. The building appeared to be rotating slowly, as if the entire structure was turning on an axis. I blinked hard, convinced it was an optical illusion. When I looked again, the rotation had stopped, but the facility now appeared to be at a different angle relative to the surrounding terrain. The mountains behind it had shifted position. I ran back, no longer concerned with taking measurements. As I approached the perimeter fence, a tremor ran through the ground beneath my feet. Not a typical earthquake, more like a wave passing through the earth itself, distorting distances as it moved. The facility seemed to stretch before my eyes, elongating impossibly before snapping back to normal proportions. For a brief, terrifying moment, I could see through the solid walls to the corridors inside, as if the structure had become partially transparent. Then everything stabilized. I stood frozen, questioning my own perceptions, when the facility's external speakers activated with an automated message. Emergency broadcast alert. Spatial instability event detected. All personnel remain in current position until stabilization. Do not attempt to navigate during distortion phase. Federal Emergency Management System. I'd never heard this particular alert before, but its timing confirmed what I'd witnessed was real. A momentary breakdown in spatial integrity affecting the entire area. When I finally made it back inside, the facility was in controlled chaos. Researchers hurried through corridors, securing equipment and gathering data. The digital displays on the walls showed static where maps should have been. Several showed the same message: coordinate system failure, recalibrating. Drew met me at the airlock, his face ashen. It's accelerating, he said without preamble. The epicenter shift is happening faster than my model predicted. We don't have until 3:17 tomorrow. We have until 17:42 today. Major Reeves appeared behind him, now dressed in full tactical gear. All non-essential personnel are being evacuated by helicopter. The last transport leaves in 1 hour. What about our stabilization attempt? I asked. Still authorized, she confirmed, but only essential personnel remain. The rest are being relocated to safe distance. As we hurried to the Geomagnetic lab, I noticed strange distortions in the facility itself. Corridors that should have been straight now curved slightly. Doorways didn't quite align with their frames. The building was subtly warping along with the surrounding landscape. In the lab, Drew had modified one of the monitoring devices into what he called a spatial anchor, a device designed to emit a stabilizing pulse at the exact moment the distortion epicenter passed beneath us. It won't fix everything, he explained as he worked, but it should reestablish a predictable pattern, slow the expansion, buy time for a more permanent solution. And if it fails? Major Reeves asked. Drew didn't look up from his work. Then what happened to Dr. Morris could happen on a much larger scale. Spaces that don't connect properly. Places where reality itself is torn. You never fully explained what happened to her, I said. Drew's hands stilled. She walked into a spatial fold, a place where 2 points that should be distant from each other had collapsed together, like a wrinkle in fabric. She stepped through that wrinkle, and the fold collapsed behind her. Could she still be alive? Major Reeves asked. Theoretically, but she'd be in a pocket of space disconnected from our reality. No way in, no way out. The implications were staggering. If these distortions continued to grow unchecked, such spatial folds could begin appearing anywhere, swallowing people, buildings, entire regions into disconnected pockets of reality. As Drew resumed work on the spatial anchor, I looked out the lab window. The mountains surrounding our facility seemed to waver, like a reflection in troubled water. For a moment, just a moment, they disappeared entirely, revealing an impossible void beyond. Then they reappeared, but subtly altered. Different peaks, different shapes. I understood then what the emergency alert truly meant. Do not trust any maps from before the incident, because the territory itself was changing. Research log, Cartographic Anomaly Assessment. Date, March 26, 25. Entry number 52. Researcher, Dr. Elias Warner. Yesterday's stabilization attempt failed. I need to record what happened while my memory is still reliable. The spatial distortions have begun affecting perception itself. Moments of déjà vu, sudden disorientation, memories that don't quite align with reality. I no longer fully trust my own senses, but I must document what occurred. At 17:30, 12 minutes before the distortion epicenter was predicted to pass beneath the facility, Drew completed final preparations on the spatial anchor. The device hummed with energy, its core components glowing with an eerie blue light. Major Reeves had ordered all remaining personnel to gather in the central command room, which offered the best structural integrity in case of catastrophic failure. Only Drew, Major Reeves, and I remained in the Geomagnetic lab. The monitoring equipment showed the approaching epicenter as a swirling vortex of color on the topographical display, a visual representation of space itself twisting into impossible configurations. 2 minutes to alignment, Drew announced, eyes fixed on the countdown timer. Once it passes beneath us, we'll have a 15-second window to activate the pulse. Major Reeves stood by the sealed door, sidearm drawn. I'd questioned the need for a weapon, but she'd merely stated, precautionary measure. Against what, she wouldn't say. As the countdown approached 0, the air in the lab grew heavy. My ears popped as if the atmospheric pressure had suddenly changed. The lights flickered, steadied, then dimmed to a dull amber glow as emergency power kicked in. 30 seconds, Drew called, hands poised over the activation controls. The floor beneath us vibrated subtly. Papers slid from desks. A cup of coffee tipped over, spilling in slow motion. The liquid forming impossible shapes as it fell, defying gravity momentarily before splashing across the floor. 15 seconds, the vibration intensified. Through the window, I could see the mountains surrounding the facility beginning to blur, as if viewed through heat waves. But the air was cold, freezing, in fact. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, spreading in geometric patterns unlike any natural ice formation I'd ever seen. 5 seconds, the monitors tracking the epicenter suddenly shifted from a swirling vortex to a perfect straight line, then went blank. Every electronic device in the room shut down simultaneously. Manual override, Drew shouted, abandoning the control console to physically wrench a large lever on the side of the spatial anchor. It's passing directly beneath us now. The anchor emitted a high-pitched whine, its blue glow intensifying to near-blinding levels. For a moment, I thought we'd succeeded. Then the device began to vibrate violently, components shaking loose, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. It's not strong enough, Drew yelled over the noise. The distortion is too powerful. Major Reeves suddenly moved toward the device. Can it be amplified? Theoretically, Drew shouted back. But we'd need an electromagnetic boost beyond what this equipment can generate. Major Reeves reached into her tactical vest and produced a small device I didn't recognize. Military prototype, she explained tersely, already connecting it to the anchor's power input. Portable EMP generator. Will this work? Drew's eyes widened. Yes, but it'll fry everything, including the anchor itself. One-shot deal. Do it, she ordered. As Drew integrated the military device, the distortion reached its peak. Reality itself seemed to bend around us. The walls of the lab appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living organism. My own hands looked wrong somehow, fingers too long one moment, too short the next. Now, Drew shouted, activating both devices simultaneously. The combined pulse hit with physical force, knocking us all to the ground. A blinding flash filled the room, followed by absolute darkness. In that moment of darkness, I experienced something impossible. I saw the facility from above, as if floating outside my body. Below me, the entire complex had twisted into a spiral shape that no architecture could support. Then consciousness returned. I found myself exactly where I'd fallen, sprawled across the lab floor. Emergency lights had activated, casting the room in dim red illumination. Both the spatial anchor and Major Reeves's device were completely destroyed, components fused into unrecognizable slag. Drew was already checking the few analog instruments that had survived the pulse. It worked, he announced, voice hoarse with exhaustion. Partially, at least. The exponential expansion has been halted. The distortions haven't been eliminated, but they've stabilized into a new pattern. Will they still spread? Major Reeves asked, pulling herself to her feet. Yes, but not catastrophically. More like ripples in a pond rather than a tsunami. We've bought time. Months, maybe even years. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. When we tried to exit the lab, we discovered the door wouldn't open. Not because it was locked, the electronic system was fried, but because the doorway itself had changed shape. What had been a standard rectangle was now slightly trapezoidal, the door no longer fitting the frame. Major Reeves had to force it open with a pry bar from the emergency kit. Beyond the door, we found the corridor had altered as well. What should have been a straight passage now curved gently to the right, the floor sloping at an angle that made walking difficult. Residual distortions, Drew explained as we made our way carefully toward the command center. The pulse stabilized the pattern, but not before permanent alterations to local spatial geometry occurred. When we reached the command center, the scene was chaotic. The remaining staff were disoriented, some reporting impossible experiences during the moment of peak distortion. One researcher claimed to have seen through the facility walls to the mountains beyond. Another reported witnessing the same room from multiple angles simultaneously. Most disturbing were the reports from the security team monitoring the external cameras. According to their observations, the landscape surrounding the facility had changed significantly. Familiar landmarks had shifted position or altered appearance. The access road that connected us to the nearest highway now appeared to loop back on itself, forming an impossible closed circle. We're effectively cut off, Major Reeves announced after assessing the situation. At least until we can determine safe navigation routes through the distorted terrain. That was 20 hours ago. Since then, we've been operating under quarantine protocols. No one enters or leaves the facility. All external communications remain down. Whether from the EMP pulse or the spatial distortions is unclear. This morning, Major Reeves called Drew and me to a private meeting. She revealed what little she knew about the incident that had started everything. December 12th wasn't the first attempt to control the anomalies, she explained. It was the third. The first two were smaller, more cautious experiments conducted in the 1990s. They failed, but without catastrophic consequences. The December attempt was more ambitious, an effort to permanently eliminate the anomalies rather than merely study them. Who authorized it? I asked. Major Reeves hesitated. Director Cho was following orders from a division so classified I don't know its name. But I know this, they were warned about the risks. Your friend Drew wasn't the only one to submit concerns. Their own scientists calculated a 17% chance of spatial fracturing if the experiment failed. They risked an 83% chance of success, Drew noted bitterly, and created a tear in the fabric of reality instead. I added. Major Reeves nodded grimly, which is why I'm implementing a new security protocol. Dr. Warner, you've seen the Project Cartographer files. You know these anomalies have been documented for decades. What you don't know is why they occur in this specific region. She produced an old paper folder, actual paper yellow with age, and placed it on the table between us. The cover bore a single word, origin. This is beyond classified, she said quietly. What I'm about to show you would get me court-martialed under normal circumstances. But we're far beyond normal, and you need to understand what we're dealing with. The folder contained photographs from 1967, the original military survey team that had first documented the anomalies. The images showed an excavation site deep in the mountains, where the team had discovered something impossible, a metallic object of clearly artificial origin, estimated to be buried for at least 10,000 years. The anomalies were always centered around this object, Major Reeves explained. The government built this facility to study both the object and its effects on surrounding space-time. Where is it now? Drew asked, voice barely above a whisper. Major Reeves closed the folder. Directly beneath us, in a shielded chamber 5 levels below this room. And since yesterday's pulse, it's become active for the first time since its discovery. As if to confirm her words, the lights flickered throughout the facility. Through the command center windows, I could see the distorted landscape beyond, a world where maps no longer applied, where space itself had become unreliable. And somewhere below us, an ancient technology was awakening. Research log, Cartographic Anomaly Assessment. Date, April 2nd, 25. Entry number 58. Researcher, Dr. Elias Warner. I can't find my office. It should be simple, down the east corridor from the command center, 3rd door on the left. I've walked that path every day for 3 years. But this morning, after leaving the daily briefing, I turned down the corridor and found myself in an entirely unfamiliar section of the facility. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, branching into areas that shouldn't exist on our floor plans. For 20 minutes, I wandered increasingly unfamiliar passages before finally encountering Drew, who looked as disoriented as I felt. Elias, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank God. I've been lost for nearly an hour. The layouts changed again, I confirmed, trying to keep the rising panic from my voice. Drew nodded grimly. Not just changed, it's actively changing. I swear I passed the same intersection 3 times, but the corridors led to different destinations each time. We decided to return to the command center together, using the buddy system Major Reeves had implemented after 2 researchers disappeared last week. They were eventually found in the maintenance tunnels, severely dehydrated and confused, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. As we walked, I noticed subtle shifts in our surroundings. Doorways seemed to drift slightly in my peripheral vision, settling back into place when directly observed. The floor occasionally undulated beneath our feet, so subtly it might have been imagination, except Drew felt it too. It's accelerating, he murmured. The stabilization is breaking down. We finally reached the command center after 30 minutes of careful navigation through what should have been a 3-minute walk. Major Reeves was waiting, her expression tense but controlled. We've mapped the current layout, she announced, gesturing to a large paper map spread across the central table. No digital displays, they couldn't be trusted anymore, showing different configurations to different viewers. Everyone gets a physical copy. Mark changes as you encounter them. The map itself was disturbing, corridors that twisted impossibly, rooms that overlapped in ways that defied 3-dimensional space. Someone had attempted to represent the spatial anomalies with different colored pencils, creating a psychedelic nightmare of intersecting lines. Dr. Warner, Reeves nodded toward me. Dr. Cho has requested your presence in his office. I stared at her in disbelief. I don't even know how to find my own office, let alone his. She handed me a small compass, not electronic, but an old-fashioned magnetic model. This might help. Magnetic north still seems consistent, despite the spatial distortions. Might, I echoed. Her expression remained impassive. It's the best we have, Dr. Cho insisted on speaking with you specifically. Drew squeezed my shoulder. I'll come with you. Major Reeves shook her head firmly. Dr. Cho was explicit. Dr. Warner alone. Drew began to protest, but I cut him off. It's fine. I'll be careful. I took the compass, noting with unease how the needle trembled slightly despite the absence of magnetic interference. 1 hour, Major Reeves said. If you're not back, we come looking. The journey to Dr. Cho's office should have taken 5 minutes. It took 23, and twice I found myself in corridors that couldn't possibly exist within the facility's original design. One passageway sloped downward at an angle that caused my boots to slide on the polished floor, leading to a series of rooms with ceiling heights that varied from claustrophobically low to improbably high. Throughout the journey, I used the paper map to track my route, but it quickly became useless. Doorways appeared where none were marked, and entire sections marked on the map were missing completely. Only the compass provided any consistent guidance, though even it occasionally spun wildly before settling back on north. I finally reached Cho's office, or what had become his office. The nameplate was correct, but the door itself was wrong. What had been a standard metal door was now wooden, ornately carved with intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed too long. I knocked. Enter, came Cho's voice, sounding oddly distant despite being just beyond the door. The office inside defied understanding. While the outer dimensions couldn't have been more than 15 feet square, the interior stretched into what appeared to be an endless library. Bookshelves extended far beyond the possible boundaries of the facility, vanishing into distant darkness. Cho sat at a desk near the entrance, utterly calm amidst the spatial impossibility. Dr. Warner, he acknowledged without looking up from the ancient leather-bound book he was studying. Please sit. I remained standing. What's happening to the facility? Reality is recalibrating, he replied, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes looked different, deeper somehow, with an unsettling clarity. The maps in your mind no longer match the territory. That's why I needed to see you specifically. Why me? Because you're a cartographer. Your brain is trained to understand spatial relationships in ways others can't. You're experiencing the discrepancies more acutely than anyone else. I struggled to process this. Are you saying this is psychological? No, he said firmly. The spatial distortions are quite real, but perception matters. Major Reeves sees the changes through a military lens, threats and strategic complications. Dr. Mercer sees them through the equations of theoretical physics. But you see the patterns, the underlying logic. I glanced around the impossible library. There's no logic to this. There is, Cho insisted, just not human logic. The artifact isn't malfunctioning, Dr. Warner. It's functioning exactly as designed. It's rewriting local spatial parameters according to a different set of dimensional constants. He stood and walked to a nearby shelf, retrieving what appeared to be an ancient scroll. When he unrolled it across his desk, I saw it was a map unlike any I'd ever encountered. Not just of unfamiliar territory, but drawn according to principles that violated basic cartographic rules. Distances and proportions shifted across the surface, regions overlapped impossibly, and the coordinate system appeared to fold back on itself. This was found with the artifact, Cho explained. We've never been able to decipher it, but I believe it's not a map of a place. It's a map of a process. The gradual transformation of space. Into what? I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Something compatible with wherever the artifact came from. The implications were staggering. You're saying it's terraforming? Not just the facility, but reality itself. Cho nodded gravely. And accelerating since the failed stabilization attempt. Your minds, our human minds, are trying to impose order on the changing spatial relationships, creating memory maps that no longer match physical reality. The emergency alerts, I realized suddenly, warning not to trust maps from before the incident. They weren't just talking about physical maps. No, Cho confirmed. They meant mental maps too, cognitive spatial frameworks. the ways we navigate familiar environments automatically. A wave of nausea hit me as I processed the implications. Our brains themselves were becoming unreliable navigational tools. Is that why people are getting lost? Their mental maps don't match reality anymore. Precisely, said Cho. And it's getting worse. Some researchers have reported experiencing multiple locations simultaneously, perceptual bifurcation. Their consciousness split between conflicting spatial realities. I remembered the disorienting sensation I'd experienced during the stabilization attempt, seeing the facility from outside my body. Like remote viewing? More like quantum superposition, Cho replied. Existing in multiple spatial configurations simultaneously. A sudden realization struck me. Major Reeves knows more than she's telling us, doesn't she? These aren't just emergency protocols. The military has encountered this before. Cho's expression darkened. Major Reeves represents interests that go beyond mere scientific curiosity. Dr. Warner, the artifact's capacity to reconfigure space has strategic implications. Before I could press him further, the lights flickered throughout the office. The endless bookshelves seemed to contract, the impossible space folding in on itself momentarily before expanding again. We're running out of time, Cho said urgently. The transformation is approaching a critical threshold. When it completes, a sudden emergency alert blared through the facility's speakers, cutting him off. Unlike previous alerts, this one was crystal clear. Attention all personnel. Reality integrity at critical levels. Report to designated cognitive anchor points immediately. Do not trust spatial memory. Follow only current sensory input. Repeat. Do not trust. The message dissolved into static, then silence. Cho quickly rolled up the ancient map and thrust it into my hands. Take this. Find Major Reeves. Tell her we've reached stage 3. She'll understand. What's stage 3? I demanded. Instead of answering, Cho moved to his desk and retrieved a small device I hadn't noticed before, similar to the portable EMP generator Major Reeves had used during the stabilization attempt, but more refined. Reality anchors, he explained briefly. Temporary stabilization of local space. It should give you enough time to reach the command center. And you, Cho gave me a resigned smile. I need to go below, to the artifact chamber. Someone has to. His voice trailed off as he looked past me toward the office door. His expression changed to one of horror. I turned to see what had alarmed him and froze. Major Reeves stood in the doorway, but something was terribly wrong. Her silhouette seemed to flicker between multiple versions of herself, overlapping and separating like a visual echo. Behind her, the corridor stretched into infinite darkness. Dr. Warner. Her voice echoed strangely, as if coming from multiple sources simultaneously. Step away from Director Cho. Major. I couldn't hide my shock. What's happening to you? She's experiencing accelerated spatial dissociation, Cho whispered urgently. Her consciousness has already begun to fragment across multiple spatial configurations. Major Reeves raised her sidearm, her movements jerky and disjointed. The maps in your mind, Warner, she said, her voice now completely wrong, layered and distorted. They're the key, not the artifact, not the facility, the cognitive patterns of a cartographer. I began to back away, clutching the ancient map scroll. Major, you're not making sense. The experiment was never about stabilizing the anomalies, she continued, her form continuing to shift and fragment. It was about controlled replication, weaponization. Cho activated the reality anchor with a sharp click. A wave of distortion rippled outward, momentarily stabilizing the office space, and Major Reeves along with it. In that instant of clarity, her expression changed to one of desperate urgency. Run, she commanded, her voice briefly her own again. Find Drew. Trust no one else. The emergency broadcasts are compromised. The stabilization effect faded almost immediately. Major Reeves's form began to fragment again, her outlines blurring as if viewed through fractured glass. I didn't wait to see more. Clutching the ancient map, I bolted past her shifting form and into the corridor beyond. The compass spun wildly in my hand, rendering it useless. The paper map from the command center showed a layout that no longer existed. All I had now were my senses and a terrible suspicion that even they could no longer be trusted. The maps in my mind, my trained cartographer's brain, had become both the key to understanding what was happening and completely unreliable. As I ran through the increasingly impossible architecture of the facility, one thought kept repeating: don't trust any maps from before the incident, not even the ones in my mind. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: April 9th, 25. Entry number 63. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. Drew has been missing for 36 hours. After my encounter with Dr. Cho and the fragmented version of Major Reeves, I managed to find my way back to the command center through increasingly distorted corridors. The facility's architecture had deteriorated further, doorways opening to impossible locations, stairwells that led both up and down simultaneously, windows looking out on landscapes that couldn't possibly exist in our mountain range. When I finally reached the command center, I found only chaos. Researchers huddled in small groups, some arguing violently over conflicting perceptions of their surroundings. The large paper map on the central table had been torn to shreds. Drew was there, frantically checking readings on an old analog seismograph, one of the few measuring devices still functioning reliably. When he saw me, his face flooded with relief. "Elias, thank God. Major Reeves went looking for you 20 minutes ago." "I just saw her," I said, still breathless from running. "Or something wearing her shape." I quickly recounted my meeting with Dr. Cho and the disturbing encounter with the fractured Major Reeves. Drew listened intently, his expression growing darker as I described Cho's explanation of the artifact and its purpose. "Spatial reconfiguration," he muttered when I finished. "That explains the readings we've been getting. The facility isn't just changing shape. It's being restructured at a fundamental level." I showed him the ancient map Cho had given me. Drew examined it with growing amazement. "This projection method is impossible," he whispered. "The coordinate system folds into itself like a Klein bottle. No physical space could be represented this way unless what? Unless space itself is being folded." He looked up at me, eyes wide. "Elias, I think this is a blueprint, not just for changing the facility, but for changing the fabric of reality in this region." Before we could discuss it further, the emergency broadcast system crackled to life. This time, the message wasn't the standard warning about maps. Instead, a cold, mechanical voice announced, "Attention all personnel. External communication established. Evac protocol active. Proceed to helipad for immediate extraction. Final departure in 2 hours." The message repeated once, then cut to silence. Glances were exchanged around the command center. No one moved toward the exits. "That's not protocol," Drew said quietly. "We haven't received the authorization codes. And Major Reeves warned me the emergency broadcasts are compromised," I added. One of the junior researchers, I think her name was Chun, approached us hesitantly. "I was just at the helipad 10 minutes ago," she said. "There's nothing there. No helicopters, no extraction team. Just emptiness." "Emptiness?" Drew asked. Chen's expression grew troubled. "The helipad is there, but beyond it, it's hard to describe. Like the mountains just stop, and there's a void beyond." Drew and I exchanged worried glances. If the spatial distortions had progressed to creating actual voids in reality, we were approaching a catastrophic threshold. "We need to verify," Drew decided suddenly. "I'll check the helipad myself." "I'll come with you," I insisted. Drew shook his head. "One of us needs to stay here, coordinate with the others, document everything." He patted the ancient map I was still clutching. "And work on understanding that." Despite my protests, Drew was adamant. He gathered emergency supplies, flashlight, water, first aid kit, and one of Cho's reality anchors, and departed for the helipad. The last thing he said to me was, "If I'm not back in 2 hours, don't come looking. Focus on the map. It's the key to everything." That was 36 hours ago. The first 12 hours after Drew left, I tried to maintain hope. Communications throughout the facility had become increasingly unreliable, with radios picking up impossible frequencies and transmitting messages from what seemed like different time periods. I told myself Drew might simply be unable to contact us. By hour 18, search teams had been organized. 3 groups of 2 researchers each following Reeves' buddy system protocols. I wanted to join them, but the remaining senior staff insisted I focus on deciphering the ancient map, our only potential insight into the artifact's purpose. All 3 teams returned without finding Drew. Their reports were disturbing. The path to the helipad no longer followed any consistent route. One team reported climbing up 6 flights of stairs only to find themselves in the basement. Another described a corridor that stretched endlessly, seeming to repeat the same section of hallway no matter how far they walked. At hour 24, we received our first clue. A security camera in the East Wing, one of the few still functioning, captured 3 seconds of footage showing Drew walking purposefully down a corridor, checking some kind of handheld device. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 2 hours after he left the command center. The strange part was that the East Wing had been completely inaccessible since the stabilization attempt, sealed behind a section of collapsed ceiling. No one had been able to enter it for days. When we managed to force our way through the debris blocking the corridor, we found no sign of Drew. Instead, we discovered his backpack leaning against a wall, the reality anchor inside still intact but drained of power. Beside it lay his camera, undamaged. I brought the camera back to the command center and downloaded its contents to an old laptop. Newer computers had begun displaying corrupted data and impossible images that caused severe headaches in anyone who viewed them too long. The footage from Drew's camera haunts me. It starts normally enough. Drew narrating his journey to the helipad, documenting the increasingly bizarre spatial distortions along the way. Doorways leading to wrong rooms, stairwells that seem to loop back on themselves, windows showing impossible vistas. The architectural integrity is completely compromised. Drew's voice says from behind the camera as he films a hallway that appears to twist like a corkscrew. But there's a pattern to the distortions. They're not random. The footage continues, showing Drew's discovery that the helipad broadcast was indeed false. The rooftop access had vanished completely, replaced by what appears to be an endless expanse of empty white space extending beyond the facility's boundary. It's as if reality itself stops at the perimeter. Drew narrates, his voice tense but analytical. A boundary between configured and unconfigured space. Then comes the most disturbing sequence. Drew turns the camera on himself, his expression grave but determined. "Elias, if you're watching this, I've made a decision. The spatial discontinuities are clearly centered on the artifact chamber. I'm going to attempt to reach it." He holds up a crudely drawn map. "I've been tracking the pattern of distortions, and there's a logic to them, almost like tidal flows. If I time it right, I should be able to navigate to the lower levels when the tide shifts." The footage jumps forward. Drew must have turned off the camera to conserve battery. When it resumes, he's in a part of the facility I don't recognize. The walls have a strange, organic quality, as if the concrete and metal were gradually being replaced by something else. Something that looks almost like living tissue. "I'm getting close," Drew whispers. "The structural changes are most pronounced here. It's like the facility is being digested and reconfigured." The camera turns to show a door that shouldn't exist. Massive, circular, and seemingly made of some dark material that absorbs light. Carved into its surface are symbols similar to those on the ancient map Cho gave me. "This is it," Drew says, voice barely audible now. "The way to the artifact chamber. But it's not where it should be. It's somehow migrated upward through 5 levels of the facility." The footage becomes chaotic as Drew approaches the door. The camera shakes violently, static cutting across the image. Through the interference, I can just make out the door slowly opening, revealing not a chamber beyond, but what appears to be an endless tunnel spiraling away into darkness. Drew's voice comes through one last time, distorted and strange. "It's beautiful. I can see the pattern now. The new cartography, space folding into." The footage ends abruptly. That was 12 hours ago. Since then, I've been trying desperately to decipher the ancient map, hoping it might reveal how to find Drew or stabilize the facility. Major Reeves hasn't reappeared, and Dr. Cho remains missing as well. This morning, we recovered one final piece of evidence from Drew's expedition. A research assistant found a small digital recorder in the East Wing corridor, nowhere near where we discovered the backpack and camera. The audio file contained only 30 seconds of recording. Drew's voice, calm but somehow different, speaking words that chill me to the bone. The maps were wrong from the beginning, Elias. Not just after the incident, always. Our understanding of space was incomplete. The artifact isn't changing reality. It's revealing it. Come find me. I can show you the true geography now. The recording ends with what sounds like Drew laughing, the sound echoing as if in a vast empty space. I don't know if my friend is still alive, or if whatever reached him through that impossible door has merely taken his voice. But I know I have to find him. Tonight, I'm going to follow his path to that circular door. I've studied the pattern of distortions as he suggested, tracked the tidal flows of spatial reconfiguration. There's a window at precisely 2:37 a.m. when I believe I can reach the artifact chamber. If I don't return, let this log serve as warning. The cartography of reality itself is being rewritten, and whatever intelligence guides the artifact, it's not trying to destroy our world. It's trying to connect it to somewhere else entirely. Research log, Cartographic Anomaly Assessment. Date, April 12, 25. Entry number 67. Researcher, Dr. Elias Warner. I should be dead. By every law of physics I've ever known, what happened 3 nights ago should have torn my body apart at the molecular level. Instead, I'm alive, though alive might not be the right word anymore. Not entirely. I need to document what I found, while I still remember being human, while my thoughts still arrange themselves in linear patterns. After my last entry, I followed Drew's path to the circular door. The facility had transformed beyond recognition by then. The walls pulsated with slow, rhythmic movements. Doorways dilated like pupils adjusting to light. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably. In some corridors I walked normally, in others I found myself moving sideways along walls or across ceilings, my perception of down shifting accordingly. I carried minimal equipment: a flashlight, water, the reality anchor from Drew's pack, recharged using an emergency generator, and most importantly, the ancient map from Dr. Cho. I'd spent hours studying it, tracing the impossible geometries with my finger, trying to understand how space could fold in the ways it depicted. Just before 2:30 a.m., I reached the East Wing where Drew's camera had captured the circular door. The corridor looked nothing like the footage. The walls had fully transformed into the organic, tissue-like material, pulsing with dim bioluminescence that cast everything in a sickly blue glow. But the door was there, massive, black, absorbing all light that touched it. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly, yet remained perfectly still in peripheral vision. At precisely 2:37 a.m., I activated the reality anchor, creating a small bubble of stabilized space around me. The door reacted immediately, the symbols flaring with blue light, the same hue as the artifact's glow during the stabilization attempt. Then, impossibly, the circular door began to rotate rather than swing open, revealing not a passage but a spiraling tunnel that couldn't possibly fit within the facility's physical dimensions. I hesitated at the threshold. Every scientific instinct warned me to retreat, document, analyze. But Drew was somewhere beyond, and the spatial distortions were accelerating throughout the facility. We were running out of time. I stepped through. The tunnel twisted in ways my mind struggled to process, curved not just left or right, up or down, but in directions I lack words to describe. The reality anchor in my hand pulsed erratically, its stabilization field fluctuating as it encountered spatial geometries it wasn't designed to correct. After walking for what felt like minutes but could have been hours, my watch had stopped at 2:37, frozen in time. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that defied comprehension. The artifact chamber, but not as any human had designed it. The space stretched endlessly in all directions, yet somehow remained enclosed. Gravity seemed to pull from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a disorienting sense of being simultaneously right side up and upside down. At the center, though center is a flawed concept for a space with no clear boundaries, hovered the artifact. Not the small metallic object described in Cho's classified files, but a massive, pulsating structure that resembled a geometric lattice folded through dimensions I couldn't fully perceive. It rotated slowly around multiple axes at once, impossible angles forming and dissolving as it turned. And surrounding it, studying it with expressions of wonder and fascination, were a dozen researchers, including Drew. He noticed me immediately, turning with a smile that was both familiar and disturbingly alien. His movements were wrong somehow, too fluid, as if his joints operated on principles different from normal human anatomy. "Elias," he called, his voice overlapping with itself in strange echoes. "You came. I knew you would understand the map eventually." I approached cautiously, the reality anchor clutched tightly in my hand. Its light was fading rapidly, the stabilization field collapsing under the extreme spatial distortions. "Drew, what happened to you? What is this place?" He gestured expansively, his arm seeming to trace impossible curves through the air. "The true form of the artifact chamber, what it's been trying to become since it was first uncovered. A perfect interface point between dimensional states." I recognized others among the researchers: Dr. Chun, 2 security personnel who had disappeared the first week after the incident, and, most surprisingly, Major Reeves. Like Drew, they all moved with that same unsettling fluidity, their forms occasionally blurring at the edges as if they weren't fully anchored to 3-dimensional space. "The artifact isn't a weapon or a tool," Drew continued excitedly. "It's a dimensional translator. It reconfigures local space to create compatibility between different states of reality." "Compatibility for what?" I asked, fighting a mounting sense of dread. Major Reeves approached, her form more stable than the others but still subtly wrong. "For them," she said simply, pointing upward, or what my disoriented perceptions interpreted as upward. I looked. Hanging in the impossible space above the artifact were entities. Not solid forms, but complex patterns of light and shadow that shifted and flowed like living fractals. They moved with purpose through spaces that shouldn't exist, occasionally passing partially into our dimension before withdrawing again. "The dimensional membrane integrity alerts," Reeves explained, noting my expression of horrified recognition. "That's what they were really about." The incident in December thinned the boundary between our dimensional state and theirs. They've been trying to establish contact ever since. Contact? By warping our facility into this. I gestured at the impossible architecture surrounding us. "The distortions were unintentional," Drew said. "Our space and theirs operate on incompatible geometric principles. The artifact is attempting to create a translation layer, a space where both can coexist, like an airlock between different atmospheres." As if responding to his words, the artifact's rotation accelerated. The lattice structure expanded, lines of blue energy extending outward to touch each researcher present. When a tendril reached toward me, I stepped back instinctively, raising the failing reality anchor as a shield. "Don't resist it, Elias," Drew urged. "It's not harming us. It's adapting us, making us compatible with the new spatial parameters." I watched in growing horror as the energy tendrils connected with the others. Their forms became even more fluid, occasionally splitting into multiple overlapping versions before reuniting. Yet they showed no signs of pain, only fascination and something like ecstasy. "What happens when the adaptation is complete?" I demanded, still retreating. What happens to the world outside? Major Reeves answered with disturbing calm. The translation expands, a controlled reconfiguration of spatial parameters spreading outward from this facility. Eventually, a new equilibrium will be established. How far does it spread? The mountain? The state? The planet? No one answered directly. Instead, Drew approached me, moving in a way that took him through spaces that shouldn't have existed between us. "The maps in your mind, Elias," he said softly. "They're what's holding you back. The artifact needs cartographers, minds that understand spatial relationships deeply enough to help guide the translation process. That's why it called to you specifically, why it led you here." I clutched the ancient map tightly. "This isn't a blueprint, is it? It's a warning." Drew's expression flickered between pity and impatience. "It's both. A warning about the limitations of human spatial perception and a blueprint for transcending those limitations." The reality anchor in my hand gave a final pulse and died completely. Immediately, my perception of the chamber shifted dramatically. Distances expanded and contracted rhythmically. The researchers around me, including Drew, appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, their forms stretching and folding through spaces that my brain struggled to process. The entities above became more distinct, complex geometrical beings composed of light and mathematical precision. One descended toward me, its pattern recognizable from the symbols on the circular door. Drew's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "They've been waiting for this moment for millennia, Elias. The artifact was left here as a seed, planted in our reality to eventually bloom into a crossroads between dimensions." I backed toward where I thought the tunnel entrance had been, but found only more impossible space. I was trapped. The entity hovering before me pulsed with patterns of light that somehow formed concepts directly in my mind. Not words, but pure spatial understanding. It was trying to communicate. "What do they want?" I gasped, overwhelmed by the alien geometries flooding my consciousness. "To share," Major Reeves said, her voice strangely resonant. "Their dimension is dying, entropy reaching critical levels. They need new space to expand into, and in exchange, they offer us understanding of realities beyond our comprehension." The implications hit me with terrifying clarity. "They're invading, colonizing our reality, merging," Drew corrected, "creating a hybrid dimensional state where both our species can exist. But the process requires guides, human minds that understand cartography, that can help map the boundaries between old and new spatial parameters." The entity's communication intensified, flooding my mind with visions of impossible landscapes where physics operated on principles I couldn't comprehend. Worlds where space folded back on itself, where time moved in recursive loops, where consciousness could spread across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The emergency alerts, I realized suddenly, warning not to trust maps from before the incident. They were trying to prepare us for this. Major Reeves nodded. Some within the government understood what was happening. The alerts were meant to prime human consciousness for spatial reconfiguration. The artifact's rotation reached a fever pitch, the geometric lattice expanding to fill more of the chamber. The entities above descended in greater numbers, their fractal patterns intersecting with the researchers below. Where they touched, human forms became less solid, more pattern-like. I clutched the ancient map like a talisman, my last connection to human spatial understanding. The entity before me reached out with a tendril of mathematical precision, touching the map. The parchment didn't burn or disintegrate. Instead, the impossible geometries drawn upon it began to move, the ink flowing and repatterning itself into new configurations. "The boundary is collapsing," Drew announced, his voice no longer entirely human. "The translation will be complete within hours. You need to decide, Elias. Join us in mapping the new reality, or remain bound to the old cartography as it dissolves around you." The entity's light pulsed once more, offering visions of what I would become. A consciousness freed from three-dimensional constraints, able to perceive and navigate spatial relationships humans could never comprehend. All I needed to do was surrender my understanding of space. Release the maps in my mind that defined reality as I knew it. As the chamber around me continued to warp and the researchers transformed into something beyond human, I clutched the ancient map and made my choice. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date: uncertain. Entry number 72. Researcher: Dr. Elias Warner. I escaped the artifact chamber. Or perhaps escaped isn't the right word. Rather, I was expelled, rejected like an incompatible organ from a body. The entities tried to reshape me as they had the others, but something in my cartographer's mind resisted the transformation. I've lost track of time. My watch still reads 2:37 a.m., frozen at the moment I first entered the circular door. The facility calendar system has collapsed entirely. Different terminals show dates ranging from last Tuesday to 17 years from now. Even the analog clock in the command center runs erratically, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, occasionally stopping altogether. I found my way back to Dr. Cho's office after fleeing the artifact chamber. The journey was nightmarish: corridors that twisted into Mobius strips, stairwells that descended indefinitely before suddenly opening onto higher floors, rooms that existed in multiple locations simultaneously. Only the compass Major Reeves had given me provided any guidance, though its needle now spins in three-dimensional patterns instead of pointing north. Cho's impossible library had changed. The endless bookshelves remained, but the books themselves had transformed. When I pulled one from a shelf, I found not pages and text but miniature spatial models, three-dimensional representations of reality folding and unfolding between my fingers. Each book contained different configurations, different possibilities for how space could be reshaped. In the center of the library, where Cho's desk had been, I found something new. A terminal unlike any I'd seen before. Not electronic, not mechanical, but something in between. A hybrid technology that pulsed with the same blue energy as the artifact. The screen, if it could be called that, displayed what looked like code. Not computer programming as I understood it, but mathematical equations and spatial coordinates flowing and shifting in patterns too complex for me to fully comprehend. Yet parts of it seemed strangely familiar. I realized with a shock that I was looking at the source code for reality itself, or at least the localized version of reality being generated by the artifact. The equations defined how space folded, how dimensions intersected, how the laws of physics operated within the affected zone. And someone had been modifying it. There were clear human fingerprints in the code, clumsy insertions and alterations that stood out from the elegant mathematical structures around them. As I studied the terminal more closely, I found access logs. Dr. Cho's name appeared repeatedly, going back decades. But more recent entries showed another name, Major Candace Reeves. I searched the office and found a hidden compartment in what had once been Cho's desk. Inside was a weathered journal, physical paper, handwritten. Cho's private research notes, dating back to the facility's founding in 1967. The early entries documented the discovery of the artifact, the first spatial anomalies, the construction of the research station. But as I read further, the truth emerged. The government cartography research was merely a cover. From the beginning, certain military factions had recognized the artifact's potential, not as a weapon directly, but as a tool for fundamental spatial manipulation. They envisioned tactical applications. Soldiers who could move through dimensional shortcuts, facilities that existed partly outside normal space, communications that couldn't be intercepted because they traveled through channels that didn't technically exist in our dimension. Cho had been their unwitting pawn at first, a brilliant scientist pursuing pure research while his military handlers extracted practical applications. But somewhere along the way, he'd discovered the truth about the artifact and the entities it connected to. The final pages of his journal revealed his desperate attempts to prevent what was coming, the full-dimensional breach, the rewriting of local reality. He had tried to sabotage the December experiment, hoping to seal the thinning dimensional membrane before it ruptured completely. He had failed. And worse, His actions had accelerated the process. The journal's last entry was dated 3 days ago. Warner has the map now. If anyone can navigate the new spatial parameters without surrendering their humanity, it's him. I've left the terminal accessible, the backdoor access I built into the system decades ago. The entities don't understand it exists. They perceive reality too differently to recognize such a crude interface. If Warner finds this, there's a chance he can reset the parameters before the translation completes. But the window is closing rapidly. Once the dimensional merger reaches critical threshold, no human intervention will be possible. Reset the parameters. Could it really be that simple? I turned back to the terminal, studying the flowing mathematical code more carefully. Behind the elegant alien equations and the military modifications, I could see the underlying structure, a spatial framework that defined how reality was constructed in this region. My cartographer's training kicked in. I began to recognize the patterns, coordinate systems, projection methods, spatial relationships translated into mathematical formulas. Different from conventional mapping, yes, but operating on principles I could comprehend. The artifact wasn't just rewriting local space. It was remapping reality itself, using a cartographic system alien to human understanding. But any map can be redrawn. I reached for the terminal interface, a fluid surface that responded to touch like living tissue. As my fingers made contact, information flooded my mind directly. Not through vision or sound, but pure spatial understanding. I could feel the code structure, sense how the parameters connected and influenced each other. With growing confidence, I began making adjustments. Small at first, stabilizing a corridor, restoring normal gravitational vectors to a section of the facility. The changes held. Encouraged, I delved deeper, identifying the core parameters that defined the dimensional translation process. It was then that an emergency alert blared throughout the facility. Different from any before. Not a pre-recorded message, but a voice I recognized as Drew's, though distorted and layered with harmonic overtones no human vocal cords could produce. Attention! Dimensional parameters under unauthorized modification. Cartographic intervention detected. Reality enforcement team dispatched. They had detected my tampering, and they were coming. I worked faster, desperately searching for the master reset function Cho had mentioned. The code structures grew more complex as I penetrated deeper into the system, mathematical relationships so intricate they made my vision blur and my mind reel. Then I found it. A subroutine labeled in Cho's distinctively human notation, original spatial baseline. A restoration point from before the December incident, before the dimensional membrane had thinned to critical levels. As I prepared to activate it, the office door dissolved. Through the opening stepped what had once been Major Reeves and Drew, now barely recognizable as human. Their bodies shimmered between states, occasionally revealing glimpses of the fractal entities partially merged with their forms. "Stop!" commanded the Reeves entity, its voice resonating from multiple points in space simultaneously. "You cannot comprehend the damage you would cause." The Drew entity moved toward me in a way that violated normal physics, covering the distance between us by folding space rather than traversing it. "The translation is nearly complete," it said. "Millions of their kind have already crossed the dimensional boundary. Reverting the spatial parameters now would trap them here, in configurations incompatible with your reality." "That's the point," I retorted, fingers still working the terminal interface. "No," the Drew entity insisted. "You don't understand. Incompatible doesn't mean they would die. It means they would exist in spatial conformations that would tear apart the fabric of this reality. The energies released would devastate this entire region." I hesitated. "You're saying a reset would cause a bigger catastrophe?" The Reeves entity nodded, its form flickering between states. "The translation must complete. Allow the dimensional merger to stabilize. A new equilibrium will establish itself." "And what happens to humanity in this new equilibrium?" I demanded. The entities exchanged what might have been glances, though their faces phased between human and abstract pattern too quickly to read expressions. "Adaptation," the Drew entity finally said. as we have adapted. In that moment, I saw the truth in their transformed state. They weren't quite human anymore, but they hadn't been completely overwritten either. Something of Drew still existed within the hybrid being before me. His curiosity, his analytical mind, his determination to understand. But they served the entities now. Their perception of reality fundamentally altered to align with the dimensional invaders. My hand hovered over the reset command. If they were telling the truth, activating it would cause untold destruction. If they were lying, failing to act would surrender our world to dimensional colonization. The map Cho had given me, the ancient cartographic representation of dimensional folding, suddenly grew warm in my pocket. I withdrew it, and to my amazement, the patterns on it had changed again. No longer depicting the transition between dimensional states, it now showed something new. A third option, not a reset, not surrender, but redirection. The entities reacted immediately to seeing the map, their forms destabilizing in what I interpreted as alarm. "Where did you get that?" the Reeves entity demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned back to the terminal and began implementing what the map was showing me. A reconfiguration of spatial parameters that would create not a merger of dimensions, not a reversion to original states, but a controlled boundary. A border zone where both realities could connect without either being fundamentally altered. "What are you doing?" the Drew entity asked, moving closer but seemingly unable to interfere directly with the terminal. "Creating a new map," I answered, fingers flying across the interface as understanding flooded through me. "One where your world and ours can coexist without either being consumed." The entities tried to stop me, but something about my interaction with the terminal protected me. Perhaps Cho's backdoor access created a bubble of original spatial parameters around me. As I completed the final commands, the facility shuddered violently. The impossible architecture began to shift again, but this time with purpose and direction rather than chaotic distortion. Walls solidified, gravity normalized, distances reasserted their Euclidean relationships. Through the office window, I could see a new reality taking shape, our familiar mountain landscape returning, but with sections where the dimensional boundary remained thin, contained areas where the entities could exist without rewriting our entire reality. The Drew entity stared at me with an expression caught between anger and respect. "What have you done, Cartographer?" "Created a border zone," I replied, watching as the transformation spread outward from the facility. A mapped boundary between worlds. The terminal pulsed once more, then displayed a simple message in human text. "Parameters accepted. Dimensional translation redirected. New cartography established. Border protocol active." As reality stabilized around us into its new configuration, emergency alerts began broadcasting throughout the facility. This time, I was certain with genuine instructions. "Attention all personnel. Dimensional border protocol initiated. New mapping system online. Recalibration of geographical coordinates in progress. Do not trust any maps from before the incident. Updated navigation data available at Central Command." Through the window, I watched as the sun rose over a landscape forever changed, yet still recognizably ours. Research log. Cartographic anomaly assessment. Date. Redacted. Entry number 75. Researcher. Dr. Elias Warner. I've been staring at this terminal for hours, trying to find the words to document what happened after I discovered the truth behind Dr. Cho's research. How does one describe the experience of rewriting reality itself? The human mind isn't equipped for it. Our language lacks the vocabulary. Even a cartographer's precision fails when the very concept of location becomes fluid. 3 days have passed since I activated what I believed was Cho's reset protocol. 3 days if time still means anything. After discovering the classified files in Cho's office, the ones revealing how our cartographic research was actually military experimentation on an artifact capable of redefining spatial parameters, I knew I had to act. The mapping anomalies weren't errors. They were symptoms of a fundamental breakdown in the relationship between coordinates and physical space. Our reality was being rewritten. The emergency broadcasts had become increasingly desperate. Emergency alert. Spatial distortion level critical. Reality membrane integrity compromised. Do not trust any maps from before the incident. Await further instructions. But no further instructions came. Only silence, punctuated by the occasional burst of static that sounded almost like voices speaking in mathematical equations. Major Reeves disappeared shortly after our confrontation in the East Wing, the wing that sometimes existed on Tuesdays and Fridays but never on weekends. She'd admitted knowing about the incident all along. The December experiment wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate attempt to access what the military files called alternative spatial configurations for tactical advantage. We never meant for it to go this far, she told me, her voice strangely calm as the walls around us rippled like water. We just wanted to create shortcuts, pathways through folded space, strategic positioning. But the artifact, it wasn't a tool. It was a doorway to what she never said. The ceiling had suddenly inverted. The floor had become a vertical drop, and I'd lost her in the ensuing chaos. Her last words still echo in my nightmares. They're coming through, Warner. They're redefining this place to match their reality. And we can't stop them. Drew was the next to go. My friend, my colleague, the only person I trusted completely in this facility. I found him in the cartography lab, surrounded by maps that writhed and shifted on the display screens. He was making adjustments, his fingers moving with inhuman precision across the control panel. "Elias," he'd said without looking up, "have you ever considered that our way of mapping reality might be the flawed one? 3 dimensions, fixed coordinates. It's so limiting." When he finally turned to face me, his eyes had changed. Still Drew's brown eyes, but with something else looking out through them. Something that perceived space differently. "They just want to help us see properly," he'd whispered, "to understand how malleable reality truly is." I ran through corridors that sometimes stretched for miles, sometimes compressed into inches, past rooms where researchers floated in geometric patterns, their bodies gradually reshaping into forms I couldn't comprehend. The emergency broadcasts had stopped by then, replaced by a soft, continuous tone that seemed to emanate from every surface. Dr. Cho's office was the only place that maintained some semblance of spatial stability, presumably protected by whatever countermeasures he'd implemented before disappearing. His terminal still functioned, though the interface had grown increasingly alien. The code I'd glimpsed in his files now filled the screen, mathematical formulas that defined how space itself was constructed. And there, buried among the equations, I found what appeared to be an emergency reset protocol, a way to restore original spatial parameters and seal whatever breach had allowed this infiltration to begin. The implications were clear. If the artifact was indeed a doorway, then something had come through, entities that existed in spatial configurations incompatible with our understanding of reality. They weren't changing our maps. They were changing the territory itself, making our world compatible with their existence. I had no choice. Without fully understanding the consequences, I initiated the reset protocol. The screen flashed with warnings I couldn't read, the characters shifting between alphabets, numerals, and symbols I'd never seen before. The facility's remaining emergency systems activated, blaring an alert unlike any previous. "Attention all personnel. Spatial reconfiguration imminent. Brace for dimensional realignment." The world folded. That's the only word that comes close to describing it. Reality creased along invisible seams, collapsing in on itself before expanding outward again. For a moment that felt eternal, I experienced existence from every possible spatial perspective simultaneously. I was everywhere and nowhere, spread across configurations of matter and energy that human perception was never designed to process. When I regained consciousness, I was still at the terminal, but everything had changed. The facility appeared normal, mundane, even. Standard corridors, rectangular rooms, gravity pulling reliably downward. My watch resumed ticking. The digital calendar displayed a coherent date, but the normality was deceiving. Small inconsistencies revealed themselves gradually. shadows that fall at impossible angles, doorways that occasionally lead to different destinations, echo patterns that suggest spaces larger than their visible dimensions. Most telling of all, the maps. Every map in the facility, whether digital or physical, now includes annotations in that same alien mathematical language I saw in Cho's files. Barely perceptible to casual observation, but unmistakable to a trained cartographer's eye. The symbols appear to define boundary conditions, parameters beyond which conventional spatial relationships no longer apply. I've tried leaving the facility twice. Both attempts ended with me inexplicably returning to the main entrance after walking for hours in what should have been a straight line away from the building. The surrounding forest appears normal, but something in its geometry subtly redirects movement back toward the facility. Drew reappeared yesterday, seemingly himself again. He remembers nothing of our encounter in the cartography lab, nothing of the spatial distortions or the entity that briefly possessed him. Major Reeves returned as well, emerging from the East Wing with no memory of her disappearance. Dr. Cho remains missing. The emergency system now broadcasts a single, repeating message at regular intervals. Attention all personnel. Dimensional stabilization protocols active. Reality parameters have been reset to baseline configuration. Spatial anomalies contained. Do not trust any maps from before the incident, but I know the truth. I've studied the new facility schematics, compared them with my memories of the original layout. The reset wasn't complete. It didn't expel the infiltration, it merely contained it. The entities still exist here, but in isolated pockets of altered space, bubbles of their reality embedded within ours like air pockets in ice. And I'm beginning to suspect the reset protocol wasn't designed to restore our reality at all. The mathematical patterns I'm detecting in our restored spatial configuration are too elegant, too perfectly balanced. They don't match human cartographic principles. They're a compromise, a hybrid system allowing both realities to coexist without catastrophic interference. Last night, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the facility unlike any I'd seen before. It showed not only the physical layout, but also what appeared to be currents or flows running through the structure, energy patterns, or perhaps the movement of spatial distortion itself. A single location was marked with red ink, a storage room in the subbasement that doesn't appear on any official facility schematic. The map was signed, "Follow the new coordinates. We need to talk." See, Cho is alive. Somewhere in the spaces between spaces, in the pockets where reality remains fluid, he's found a way to persist. And he wants to meet. I'm recording this log in case I don't return. If anyone finds this, remember, the spatial reconfiguration wasn't a solution. It was a compromise. We didn't win, we negotiated. And I don't think all parties to that negotiation are satisfied with the terms. The facility seems quiet now. Normal operations have resumed. The research team continues their cartographic work, mapping a world they believe is unchanged, unaware that their new maps are documenting something fundamentally different from what existed before. They don't notice the subtle shifts in the corridors overnight. They don't see how the stars sometimes rearrange themselves when no one is watching. They don't hear the whispers that sometimes leak through thin spots in the dimensional membrane, mathematical equations spoken as poetry. But I do, and I think Cho does too. I'm going to follow his map. I need to understand what we've really done by activating that reset protocol, what we've invited into our reality, what the price of this apparent stability might be. If I don't return, if you find this log and the world around you still makes spatial sense, if maps still function and distances remain constant and rooms don't randomly relocate themselves, then perhaps the compromise is holding. But if you begin to notice discrepancies, if landmarks appear where they shouldn't be, if familiar paths lead to unfamiliar destinations, if shadows fall at impossible angles, then the membrane is thinning again. The entities are pushing against the boundaries we've established. And if that happens, there's only one piece of advice I can offer. Do not trust any maps from before the incident. They no longer represent our reality. They're artifacts of a world that doesn't exist anymore, A world with reliable dimensions and fixed coordinates and spaces that behave according to human understanding. That world is gone. And I fear the one that's replaced it is merely a temporary construction. A brief pause in a transformation that has only just begun. The emergency broadcasting system just activated again. But this time, there's something different in the mechanical voice. Subtle harmonics that shouldn't be possible from our facility's speaker system. Attention. Dimensional parameters stable. Border protocols functioning within acceptable parameters. Hybrid cartographic system online. Pause. Thank you, Dr. Warner. Your cooperation has been noted. Please proceed to the meeting coordinates. Dr. Cho is waiting. It knows my name. It's watching me record this log. I'm gonna follow the map. Not because I trust it, but because I need answers. Because someone has to understand what we've become part of. If you're reading this and the world still makes sense, pray it stays that way. This is Dr. Elias Warner, Senior Cartographer, Mountain View Cartographic Research Facility. Final entry.